which was weird. They would have gone all three. It was a boring football team, but the scores were low, but it was fun to win. It was fun to have the rivalry with SC, which was a genuine and still is rivalry. Might add, in those days we played at the Coliseum, which was basically on the SC campus. And we shared it. One Saturday was our, next Saturday was theirs.
Okay. Wasn't there a fraternity that was just your rival?
Yes.
And you stole stuff from them?
Yeah, Fiji's.
Yeah. What did you steal?
You know, so much stuff. You're remembering something I don't remember.
Oh, okay. I thought you stole like something that was on the wall. But anyway, that's okay.
Yeah.
So,
We stole each other's girlfriends too.
yeah, that's good. So then you went. Then after UCLA, what did you do?
Went into the Navy, right out of college.
And why did you do that?
Well, there was a war going on just before that called the Korean War, which a lot of people forget about. Were it not for North Korea now and their strange world politics, it probably would have been completely forgotten. So there was still a draft, and I didn't have to worry about the draft because if your grade point was above a certain number and you took enough full-time classes, then you were ineligible until you graduated. But I didn't want to be in the Navy, or excuse me, Army, or anything like that just for a couple of years as a enlisted man when I felt that I could have a better time, frankly, and do better if I served. So you do a little more time, and I served in the Navy as an officer.
So, and what was your, when you first started, what did you do?
I went through flight training first, and in various places, Pensacola, Newport, Pensacola, Beeville, Texas. Oh, boy, what a crummy place that. Corpus Christi, mostly in the South, at naval air stations that were there, frankly, primarily for training pilots.
And so,
when I flew single engine planes. I was in what they call a single engine pipeline, and ended up in jets.
Okay, and so how long you were actually in that program?
Just a year and a half.
Okay, and so what did you end up flying?
I ended up flying what they call an F9F, and it was made by Grumman, and it was a jet, and it was not a swept wing. It was one of the last of the straight wings jets, and it didn't do the speed of sound, but it could get there if you could put it in the screaming dive, just so you could say you went through Mach 1.
Well, what did Mach what?
Mach 1.
No, I know, but I mean.
Oh, without going through the.
Yeah.
We cruised at about 500 knots. You know.
Mm-hmm. So, and so, what was the most exciting thing that you ended up doing?
Landing on a carrier. There was no war going on then, so we weren't really. I mean, we flew planes that didn't even have ammunition aboard, let alone the guns to fire them with. And so they were just training us in case, because the Cold War was certainly going on, in case a war broke out. So that there was no excitement in that regard, which looking back on it at the time I wish there had been, but I'm glad there wasn't, because a lot of guys got killed in Korea flying. Anyhow, obviously the most exciting thing I did in both propeller planes, which is the first thing you get to do, land on a carrier. The first time you get to land on a carrier, it's in a prop plane. And then ultimately in a jet, I landed on a carrier a number of times.
How many times do you think?
Probably a dozen and a half.
Wow. Okay. Were you scared?
You know, it's funny, they put you through what they call FCLP, Field Carrier Landing Practice, and you go through weeks and weeks of that as though simulating going aboard the ship. But of course they can't make the ground move because you land on the ground in a pattern, a real tight flight pattern similar to what you come in board. And that doesn't really prepare you for the carrier because, of course, the carrier is in a sea state that's making it wobble up and down, you can imagine. And in those days, they didn't have the electronic eye, which became known as the meatball, which you could glide in on. You were dependent on what they called the landing signal officer, LSO. Everything had an acronym. And you just prayed and hoped you had a good one that would, you watch his paddles, basically, like, and the paddles at the end of his arms were your indicator of lower that wing or whatever. So you had a lot of help, but as you came aboard, there were 9 wires, and the idea was your tail hook would grab. If you didn't get the first couple one, you had to be prepared to hit that throttle and wave off. And the LSO helped you with that.
Did you ever have to wave off?
Almost everyone had to wave off. Sometimes the carrier took a lurch at the time you didn't think it was going to, and stuff like that. And usually it was uneventful. But probably the most scary thing that ever happened is I got what they call a bolter, in which you get the wire, but then you lose it. And I was already starting to shut down because obviously you don't want full power against the wire. And I slammed the throttle forward on the jet, and I took off to go around again, and the power caught a little later, so I was actually below the level of the deck of the carrier by the time I got airborne, and then I came back up around.
Was you were just in the plane alone, right?
Yes,
Was anybody in
these
there?
were always solos.
Yeah, that's pretty scary, right?
Scary fun. The adrenaline rush when you make it is quite...
Yeah, I bet. So, okay, so you didn't do that forever, though. What happened?
Actually, they were going to reassign me to multi-engines because there was a need for those, they felt. And I didn't like the prospect of having to fly big birds with a co-pilot and all that stuff. So I asked to be reassigned, and I got lucky. I thought that they'd send me to like ADAC, Alaska or something like that. I asked for Shore Duty Pacific. The trick there was you asked for the opposite of what you thought you'd get. Well, it worked for me. I asked for Sea Duty Pacific. I got Shore Duty Atlantic, Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay, I would like you to make it clear why you were chosen, why you were in the group that was chosen to go into multi-engines.
Well, I had no downs. My record was spotless. That meant starting training all over again in advanced, which would extend my stay in the military. But they only chose because a lot of guys were washed out because they just decided they already had a surplus of pilots. I don't know if that's the whole story, but is there something else?
I just want to make it clear that you were not chosen to go to multi-engines because you were a really bad jet pilot.
I was quite the opposite.
Right.
There were a number of us who DOR'd. They called that drop on request.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell me about your time in Newport, Rhode Island.
It was almost like fraternity life all over again. There was a group of photo mates who, I'm not going to describe what they did, it'd take too long for the tape, but basically they really knew what they were doing, and they were all what they call rated, meaning they weren't rookies. And I had 3 chiefs and about 30 guys reported to me. And I learned a wise lesson from both Corey and other people who I respected about their military experience. And that is, depending on the service, let the sergeants/chiefs run the job until they prove they can't, and then get rid of them, get a new one. And don't mess with what's their job. So I called the 3 chiefs in individually, and we had a long heart-to-heart, and they basically ran, and I just signed stuff. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And plus I had a couple of junior officers reporting to me as well, and they did all the tough work. So I just signed stuff, and then I put together, the morale sucked when I got there because the former guy was sort of like he was just a real hard dude. So I gathered together a lot of recreational equipment. We had a lot of extra room in our billet. I made one of the rooms into a rec hall, and we had pool tables and ping pong tables, and we had tournaments, and those were all after hours. But the guys really got into it, so it was good for morale, and frankly, it was fun for everybody, including me.
Where did you live?
I lived downtown Newport, off base, and used my living allowance, which if you didn't live in the BOQ, they gave you towards rent. And 3 of us junior officers rented what had been a mansion, converted into 3 apartments. We had the top floor. We each had our own bedroom. We had a huge kitchen, 2 living rooms, awesome view of Newport Bay. It was not exactly tough duty.
What kind of car did you have?
Very impractical car for the winter in Newport. Boy, was it fun in the spring, summer, and fall. I had an Austin Healey Roadster.
Was that one of the most fun times of your life?
Yeah, it really was. I had basically, on paper, I had a lot of responsibility, but I had no real responsibility. I was old enough to not do too many stupid things, and wise enough to save money for grad school and things like that, but still young enough to have a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky I have a couple friends for that to this day.
Really? Who are they?
Well, we don't stay in touch regularly, but like I always think that I could pick up the phone and call Gene Mattias any day. In fact, we stayed in touch, if you remember, the first 5 to 6 years.
I know. Then you got in a big argument about cats.
Yes, I'd forgotten that.
Just funny. Okay, so you stayed there. So you were there for what, 2 years?
2 years.
2 years, and then do you like the East Coast? I mean, was it?
I loved it. I didn't have the feeling of being transplanted Californian or anything. They don't get that much bad weather in Newport, Rhode Island. It's moderate because of the ocean. And we got snow once in a while.
So you actually have seen 2 presidents, I think, in person.
Yes.
One we saw together, JFK, and the other was
Eisenhower.
Tell us about that.
Boy, you have a great memory. When I was in Rhode Island, allied duty, and there were 7 of us who had the duty, who were already assigned to the base, was being port control officer. And so basically we were in charge of the port it was weekends always. And you just rotated. So every 4 weeks or so I'd get the duty. And in those days there was a presidential yacht, and Eisenhower was aboard it, and they all named it after someone in their family. In his case, it was named the Barbara Ann. You can look it up, tradition, and that was one of his granddaughters. And a top secret message came, and that was another one of your responsibilities because you were cleared for top secret in the job. For him, I don't know what it was because I wasn't allowed to open it, just had to carry it. And then I carried it over to the Barbara Ann, and I started to give it to the officer of the day on the boat. He was another naval officer. In fact, I knew him. He said, "Hey, this is a chance for you to see the president. I want you to deliver it to him personally." It was in the summer, obviously, because he was there on vacation. I was in my summer whites, and I was not watching where I was going because I was looking to see a glance if I could actually see the back of his bald head. Sure enough, just about the time I saw him, I slipped and fell. And there was even though it was a very clear, clean ship, as you can imagine, I happened to pick a dirty spot. And so I was kind of leery about seeing former General Eisenhower with a dirty uniform on, but I masked it in such a way, and he never commented about it if he noticed it. So the extent of our dialogue was, especially for you, Mr. President, and he took and thanked me, and I saluted him, and I left.
Did you have to salute him when you first saw him too?
Yes.
Okay. So that was you were only there just a couple of minutes?
Yes, but I got to meet and talk to, albeit one sentence, the president. Didn't even occur to me to get his autograph or anything like that. And then ironically, that was in Newport, Rhode Island, ironically, you and I had just been married a couple of years. We were on vacation back east, and you and I together, you noticed it, driving around in Newport, Rhode Island. We were on the way to Maine. Saw Jackie and Jack Kennedy and another couple swimming. We didn't see them swimming. We saw them leaving the private beach that they would go to in Newport.
Bailey's Beach?
Bailey's Beach, good memory again. And they came out of there, and you spotted the Secret Service guy because it was, I think, because it was a hot summer day and he had a suit on, by the gate to Bailey Beach, and thought something was up, and we both knew from reading the paper or whatever that he was in town. So you encouraged us to stop, and sure enough, we waited and saw them drive out. And something like this never would have happened, but the president was driving his own convertible. Jackie was sitting in the seat with him, and the other couple was in the back seat.
Yeah. Was that a big thrill?
Big thrill.
And then how much?
Well, especially big thrill in that this was in, as I recall, July or August. It was sometime in the summer.
September, I think.
Was it September?
Yeah.
And the following November, he was assassinated.
Yeah. They were good looking, weren't they? I mean,
Very
they were
good.
I thought they were better looking than they seemed in the pictures. So, okay, so
Very
then,
handsome couple.
all right, so that now you're out of the service, and what happens?
I came back to California, went to grad school, started grad school at Claremont Grad School, and which I never dreamed that I could get into. It's amazing, and there's a moral here for whoever's watching, especially younger kids. Dream big, you might realize them. It's a very tough